Hey friends, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby, and today we're going to be doing a video for books I think you should read if you enjoyed the TV show The Last of Us. You know, I originally had this idea because, if you didn't know, The Last of Us, it's a new show that just came out on HBO this year, and it is absolutely freaking fantastic. It's actually a TV show that is based off of a video game, which, no, I have not played the video game. I know, I should probably, but I don't have a PlayStation at the moment. But it is a show that is just so freaking top tier in every way. Like, it's really one of the best shows that I've seen in a long time, and the show is kind of a, you know, it's a post-apocalyptic kind of virus, like zombie type of show, but the zombies in this show are absolutely terrifying, and they're unlike any other kind of zombies that I've ever seen in media. And you know, the original idea that I had for this video was that I was gonna do a video that was reading books recommended for fans of The Last of Us, because I was like, that would be a really fun reading vlog. But then the more that I was digging and the more that I was looking through a lot of different lists that people have made online, I realized I have actually read a lot of the books that are being recommended, and so I thought I could even make my own recommendation video for books that I actually do think are really similar to the show The Last of Us. Like, if you're looking for something that has similar vibes, you know, like similar themes with plot and different things like that, then here are some books that I think you could read that might give you the same kind of satisfaction as you got from watching the show. I do highly recommend the show though. I think it's really freaking fantastic. I think the characterization on this show is just done so well and so beautifully. We're mainly following this guy named Joel and then this younger girl named Ellie, and they're gonna be going on this mission where they're gonna have to like basically travel across the country during this apocalyptic world. It's really intense. And I think the thing that this show does best is that it just has a really good script. You know, like these characters, they just feel very real to me. Their situations feel very real, and I feel like this show, the pacing is absolutely insane. Like, this show moves freaking quick. Because I feel like other shows, like Cough the Walking Dead, they would have taken the plot of this first season and they would have like extended that into like 3 or 4 seasons, because this show covers so much just within this first season, and it's absolutely incredible, and I highly recommend it, and I can't wait to see where the show goes in the future. Without further ado, here are some books that I think you could enjoy if you also really liked the show The Last of Us. So the first recommendation is probably the book that is the most similar to the show. If I had to pick only one, it would probably be this one, because it's The Girl with All the Gifts. And this is a book that I actually read a number of years ago now. I was actually required to read this for one of my English college classes, and I had to write an entire like 4 to 5 page essay on this book. But I feel like this book is really similar to the show because we're following a young girl named Melanie, and she's living in, you know, a zombie apocalypse in a very apocalyptic world. But the thing that makes this book very similar to The Last of Us, in my opinion, is the fact that this book isn't really about the zombie apocalypse. It's more about, you know, the characters, and it's about survival, and it's kind of about what it means to be human and like what makes someone a monster in this kind of world, and almost how, you know, like humans are the more dangerous creatures than the zombies themselves. I feel like this book definitely touches on those kinds of themes, and because we're following this young girl named Melanie, who is just very similar to the character Ellie in The Last of Us in a lot of ways. Like, she definitely gives me a lot of those same character traits where she's like very independent, very stubborn, you know, wants to kind of do things on her own. And I think, like the show, I think this book can be a little bit more slower paced at times because, you know, as I said, this is more of a character study, and so it is a little bit slower of a burn than some other apocalyptic type of fiction that you might be used to. But I actually think that that's a good thing, you know, because I think the thing that makes apocalyptic fiction so interesting to me is like when it has really strong characters, and I think that's definitely something that this one has in common with the show. So I highly recommend checking out this book. I think it's a really good one. Another book that I would definitely recommend if you enjoyed The Last of Us is The Troop by Nick Cutter. I will warn you that this one is a horror novel, and it's very much a lot of body horror to the point where it's a little extreme. I know some people think I'm insane when I recommend this book because it's pretty dark and it's pretty gruesome, but this is one of my favorite books of all time. I actually consider The Troop to be like one of my top favorite horror books that I've ever read, and I have to recommend it for fans of The Last of Us just because of the nature of like this virus that's going around. I just find them to be very, very similar. So in The Troop, we're following a group of boys who are going to be going into the Canadian wilderness alone, right? And they have this one guy who's is going to be leading them. They're going to be going off into the wilderness. And then this random intruder like kind of shows up on a boat, and he's saying that he's just so hungry, and he's like thin as a rail, and something just doesn't seem right, you know, because this guy just keeps saying he's so hungry, and he's like shoveling dirt into his mouth, and he's literally trying to eat anything that he can get his hands on, basically, much like a zombie, you know? And obviously, these boys are terrified. They're stranded on this island with this guy who seems to be having some kind of virus that is just going to quickly spread throughout this troop of boys. And the reason why I think this book is so similar to The Last of Us is because of the nature of this like weird virus-like, zombie-like kind of thing that's going on. I don't know, like the imagery that I got from The Last of Us, I was like, oh my gosh, if they ever adapted the troop into like a movie or a TV show, I think it would look something like this, you know? Like that's exactly the feeling that I got when I saw the show. And I just think, you know, this is another really great take on, you know, this kind of like pandemic or this kind of virus that's quickly spreading, and it's really scary. And I think the troop also really touches on what it means to be human, and how sometimes our kindness and our like humanity is our weakness, because it might be the thing that kills us in the end. But if you were at all, you know, disturbed by some of that creepy imagery in the show The Last of Us with these zombie-like creatures, I think you will be absolutely horrified by the things that happen in the troop, but like in a good way. I think the troop is just so top tier and so freaking good. I will also warn you though, if you are sensitive to certain triggers, there is a bit of animal abuse in this book with a cat and a turtle, and it is not easy to read, but it's also brief for the most part. Another book that I would recommend that is something kind of similar to the troop and therefore is also kind of similar to The Last of Us is The Ruins by Scott Smith. However, I will let you know that this is a book that I personally DNF'd, and I don't know if it's a forever DNF, but I tried to read it a couple years ago and it just wasn't really for me. But I feel like I have to mention it because it is very similar to the troop in the sense that, you know, plot-wise, they are very similar, and with like vibes of like that feeling of doom, they are both very similar. In The Ruins, we're following a group of friends who get trapped in this Mexican jungle. So we're following these two young couples who are on this vacation, and one of the couples, the brother, goes missing, and they decide to go and look for him in the jungle, and they come upon this like site of ancient ruins, and there's an evil that's lurking there. And I think the evil, or the thing that's lurking there, it is very similar to the troop in a lot of ways, and that's why I think this book gets compared to the troop a lot. I will say though, the thing that put me off from The Ruins is that the writing style is just very, very dense. Like there's just so many paragraphs, there's little to no dialogue. Like it is not an easy book to read, but I do think I can totally see the similarities between The Ruins and The Last of Us. Like they do have a lot of similar vibes, not so much in terms of characters, but just in terms of this virus, like this creepy thing, this evil that's lurking there. I think these two have a lot in common there. All right, the next book that I wanted to recommend is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, and this is actually one that I think is so similar to the show as well. Like I really think that this book could be something that you would enjoy if you've also watched the show. And also there is a Station 11 TV show that was also adapted by HBO. I've only seen like the first 2 or 3 episodes of the show, but the book is pretty incredible. So this story, Station 11, it also takes place in like a post-pandemic, kind of like post-apocalyptic world, and we're actually following this group of people who's like a traveling symphony. But you know, something that I think makes this book so similar to this show is the fact that we kind of do get to see, you know, the start of this like pandemic, or the start of like this crazy thing that's happening. In this book, it's kind of like this really intense flu virus that's going around. It actually feels very similar to COVID, but just a little bit more extreme. And it's just really scary, you know, to read about and to see that. But then the thing that makes this book so similar to the show is that we jump ahead like 20 something years, and that's where the main story is taking place, is 20 years after this apocalypse or after this pandemic has taken place. And I think that's kind of similar to The Last of Us, you know, because in The Last of Us, in this first episode of the show, we get to see, you know, like this zombie virus thing completely break out, and it's really scary and really intense. But then the main focus of the show is happening 20 years after the first events of, you know, this zombie apocalypse. So I think they definitely have that in uncommon, where we're following characters who are already living in this world, like very established, living in this apocalyptic world. Whereas like with some of these other books, it might be more like the apocalypse or the pandemic is just breaking out and we're following characters who are panicking and like they don't know what to do. But I think it is really interesting when you follow characters who have been living in this world for quite some time and just kind of seeing like how they're getting by even 20 years later. And I do think Station 11 is one of the best kind of like pandemic apocalyptic kind of books that I've ever read. It's just so well written, like it's very beautifully written. And I feel like similarly to The Last of Us, this is going to be a story where you're really going to care about these characters and they're just really going to grow on you over time. And then similarly to Station 11, I would also recommend the book Moon of the Crusted Snow. And this one is kind of similar because this one we're also following this community of people who are kind of living off the grid and they lose power and they're not sure if it's just them or if it's like the whole world that has lost power. And this story is about this little community of people who are trying to figure out, you know, if this is like the beginning of the apocalypse, like what's going on. There's also some kind of creepy moments, you know, like this one's definitely a horror book, but it's more of like a slow burn kind of literary fiction style of horror. But I think Moon of the Crusted Snow is more of a, you know, story that's like this is just the beginning of what might be like an apocalyptic situation and just kind of seeing how people deal with this. But I think that this one's also really well written, just like Station 11. Like I feel like both of these books are just some of the most beautifully written apocalyptic type of books that I've ever read. But I also think that this one, Moon of the Crusted Snow, it has more of that like panic, you know, of people being like, what are we gonna do? Because it's just like the early stages of them trying to figure it out. But I think that this book is so good. It's so subtly creepy and it has this really great kind of like wintry, snowy atmosphere, you know, because while this is happening, like when they lose power, when all of this is going on, it's taking place during the winter. So it's like it's very snowy, it's very cold, they're very isolated, like the vibes are just so intense and they're so there. And I just think it is kind of similar to The Last of Us, because in The Last of Us we also do get those moments where they're dealing with snow and it's cold and we kind of see how they deal with that as well. And then the next one is actually going to be The Fifth Wave, which I know is maybe a like whoa out of left field recommendation from me. This was actually a book that I read, you know, back in 2014 or 2015, like almost 10 years ago, which is so crazy to say. So I don't know if I would feel the same about it if I read it today, but I feel like it's worth recommending because this was one of my favorite, you know, like young adult kind of sci-fi, dystopian, kind of post-apocalyptic books that I had ever read. And in this story, we're just following this young girl named Cassie, and this story is more of like an alien invasion type of story, which I know is a little bit different from The Last of Us, so it's not entirely accurate that these two would be similar, but I do think there are similar themes with like the post-apocalyptic storyline with following a young girl as like one of the main protagonists. Things I remember most about this book in particular is just really loving the characters in this story and then really finding some of the things creepy with like the aliens and certain aspects of this that was going on. And I feel like that's exactly how I feel about The Last of Us, is that I love the characters and I love the like subtle creepiness of like these zombies and like the doom of like you never know where they're going next. You know, I feel like that's like the nature of these apocalyptic stories, is that you're just following these people who are trying to survive, you know, and like you never really know what's gonna happen next for them, and that's part of the entertainment of like reading apocalyptic fiction. So I do think that The Fifth Wave is worth checking out. I think it is one of the better young adult dystopian books that I've read. The next recommendation that I have would actually be for Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. And this is one where, again, there is a movie adaptation of Annihilation, and I do think that the movie adaptation is personally, like for me, it's better than the book. But I still would recommend the book if you're a fan of the show, because this one is really interesting because there's this area called Area X that has been completely sealed off by the government, and it's been cut off from the rest of the world for decades, and they've been trying to send, you know, groups of people into this Area X to try to figure out like what's going on in there, but every single mission has failed in the most like epically gruesome ways. And so now this is like the 12th expedition. They're going to be sending these 4 women in, and the women have very specific jobs that they think would make a great team, you know, because we have an anthropologist, a psychologist, a biologist, you know, like really unique and interesting jobs that these women have, and they're going to be sending them into Area X and trying to figure out what is going on. This book also really delivers on, you know, like the body horror, and I think that is the thing that is most similar to The Last of Us, is like there is something similar going on in Area X as far as like in terms of like body horror and like the unsettling feelings that I got from reading this book and from watching the movie Annihilation. Oh my gosh, it is just so disturbing, but it's so on point, I think, as a recommendation for fans of The Last of Us, because I truly think it's just so terrifying. And I feel like in both stories, you're kind of following these characters who are on a mission for like something bigger than themselves, you know? Like they're both on these missions. You know that the missions are going to be dangerous and maybe even deadly, but they want to pursue these missions for the greater good, you know? So I think that's definitely something that both of these stories have in common. And Annihilation is just freaking weird. It is definitely one of like the weirdest sci-fi-ish type of books, and it has so much great body horror in it. Like it is truly some disturbing shit. And then the last book or thing that I would recommend for this video is actually The Walking Dead comics, because if you didn't know, The Walking Dead is a TV show on AMC. It actually just ended recently, but it's based off of these comics. The comics are so entertaining. I actually read these comics a few years ago, right after I got into The Walking Dead, and I read through these comics so freaking quickly. Like they are so easy to just kind of sit there and binge read all day because they're so entertaining. But the Walking Dead comics I think would be a good, you know, comparable recommendation for fans of The Last of Us, because the Walking Dead comics, you know, The Walking Dead is a series of comics about a zombie apocalypse. And we're kind of following this character named Rick, who was a cop in the real world, and now he's waking up from a coma in the zombie apocalypse. And then, you know, we're following this character, Rick. He has this wife named Lori. And then Rick also had this really close friend named Shane, who was also a police officer. And their story in The Walking Dead is just so freaking interesting. You know, kind of though what I said about my comment earlier about how The Last of Us, you know, like this plot in The Last of Us would have gotten stretched into like 4 seasons of The Walking Dead. Yeah, I do think The Walking Dead is a little bit slower paced of a zombie show, or you know, it's definitely the kind of show where like they'll introduce a new villain or something every season and it'll just last the entire season, whereas like The Last of Us, it was just like shit was happening left and right, you know, like it was just very intense constantly. Well, I think The Walking Dead is definitely a little bit more of a slow burn, but I do think that The Walking Dead, you know, the comics and the TV show, they explore similar themes of like how humanity is the real monsters and humanity is the ones that we should be afraid of, and how people really turn into monsters during a, you know, post-apocalyptic type of world. Like when civilization really falls apart, it's really scary how violent and aggressive humans can be after that. And I feel like both of these stories really capture that. I do think The Last of Us is probably superior in every single way, but if you haven't read the Walking Dead comics, or if you haven't seen the Walking Dead TV show, like I think The Walking Dead is really comparable for this. I would personally recommend the first 4 seasons of The Walking Dead. I stopped watching it after like season 6 or maybe season 7. I don't know, but I really enjoyed Walking Dead at the beginning. I thought it was really entertaining, and as far as like zombie, you know, post-apocalyptic type of stories go, it was definitely one of my favorites for sure. So I would definitely check out the Walking Dead comics. I think they're really fun. The one book that kept showing up on a ton of different lists for like books that are recommended if you like the show The Last of Us is this book Severance, which I've had this book on my TBR for literally so long, like for years. I think ever since this book published in like 2019, I want to say. So I just thought I would mention that a lot of people have been saying that Severance is very similar to The Last of Us, and I don't really know why yet. I do know that this is a like post-apocalyptic fiction type of story, but that's literally all that I know about it. But I just thought that I would mention it in case you are looking for something different, and in case you've read a few on this list and maybe you're looking for something else. I've heard Severance is very similar as well, so just thought I would mention it. But yeah, that is going to be all for this video of recommending, you know, books that are similar to The Last of Us. If you do like this style of kind of recommendation video, I have done a number of videos like this in the past where I say, if you like this book, check out this movie or TV show. So I will have some of those videos linked down below if you're looking for something else like this. And, you know, usually I would just include, you know, a few books that are similar to like The Last of Us in a video like that. But I just feel like The Last of Us is such a great TV show that I wanted one video to just kind of highlight this TV show and to recommend this TV show, and also to recommend you, you know, a few books that I thought were personally very similar. So thank you so much for watching as always, and you'll have to let me know if you've read any books that you think are similar to the show The Last of Us. Then I would love to know if you have any recommendations for me for books that you think I would enjoy if I enjoy the TV show. I would also love to know if you have seen the TV show The Last of Us, then what did you think of it? Let me know all of your thoughts down below. Which episode was your favorite? I think for me, my favorite episode is a tie between like episode 3, episode 5, or maybe like the last one. I don't know. They were all so freaking good though. So let me know all of your thoughts down below, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye.